January 12, 2010. A magnitude 7.0 earthquake strikes Haiti. In less than a minute, hundreds of thousands of lives are shattered. Buildings crumble into dust, trapping families, crushing children in schools. The devastation is absolute, indiscriminate, and utterly terrifying. Or consider the Black Death in the 14th century. A bacterial plague sweeps across continents, wiping out an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of Europe's population. People die in agony, covered in boils, their lungs filling with fluid. It is a biological nightmare of unimaginable scale. These are not acts of human cruelty. No dictator ordered the earthquake. No terrorist unleashed the plague, Bacillus. This is natural evil. The suffering and death caused not by human choices, but by the seemingly blind, impersonal forces of nature itself. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, pandemics, genetic diseases, droughts, famines, predatory animals tearing apart their prey. The list is long and horrifying. And for many people, this kind of suffering presents the single greatest challenge, the most profound and deeply felt objection to the existence of an all-powerful, all-loving God. The classic problem of evil asks, if God is all good, he wants to prevent evil, and all-powerful, he can prevent evil. Why does evil still exist? When we talk about moral evil, the suffering caused by human choices, like murder, war, and betrayal, theists often have a ready answer. The free will defense. God gave humans free will, a great good. But the unfortunate consequence is that we can choose to inflict suffering on each other. God permits this moral evil to allow for the greater good of human freedom. But what about earthquakes? What about cancer? A child born with a debilitating genetic disorder didn't choose that. The victims of a tsunami didn't freely will the wave upon themselves. The free will defense seems utterly powerless here. Nature itself seems broken, cruel, indifferent. So, the question becomes sharper, more pointed. Why would a God who supposedly designed and sustains the natural world create a system filled with such inherent dangers and suffering? How can the God who supposedly loves us allow tectonic plates to shift and viruses to mutate in ways that cause such immense, undeserved pain? Is the existence of natural evil the ultimate evidence against a benevolent creator? Or are there plausible philosophical and theological responses that can make sense of this apparent contradiction? Today, we delve into one of the deepest and most difficult questions in philosophy and theology, the problem of natural evil. Let's be clear about why natural evil hits differently. Moral evil, while horrific, at least has an identifiable perpetrator. We can point to a person or a group and say, they chose this. There's a sense of agency, however twisted. Natural evil feels different. It feels random, chaotic, meaningless. An earthquake doesn't care if you're a good person or a bad person. A virus doesn't discriminate between the innocent and the guilty. Nature, in these moments, seems utterly indifferent to human life and morality. This apparent indifference is hard to reconcile with the idea of a personal God who cares for his creation. If God designed the system, why design it with false literal fault lines that inevitably cause destruction? If God sustains the world moment by moment, why sustain the very biological processes that lead to agonizing diseases? Some simple answers often offered are deeply unsatisfying. To say it's all part of God's mysterious plan, while perhaps true, can feel like an empty platitude in the face of immense suffering. To claim that specific natural disasters are direct targeted punishments for specific sins, as some unfortunately do, seems both morally monstrous and contradicted by the indiscriminate nature of these events. Jesus himself pushed back against this idea when asked about a man born blind, stating it was not because of his sin or his parents' sin, John 9. So, we need to look for more robust philosophical and theological frameworks. Let's explore three of the most significant responses. One major line of argument is known as the soul-making theodicy, most famously developed by the philosopher John Hick. Hick argued that God's purpose wasn't to create a perfect, painless paradise for humanity from the start. Instead, His goal was to create a world where humans, through their own free choices and struggles, could develop into virtuous, resilient, and morally mature beings, children of God. And for that kind of growth to happen, the world cannot be a paradise. It needs to be a place with real challenges, real dangers, and real consequences. Think about it. How could courage exist in a world with no danger? How could compassion develop in a world with no suffering? How could perseverance be learned in a world with no obstacles? Hick argued that a world operating according to regular, impersonal, natural laws is essential for this soul-making process. We need a predictable environment where actions have consequences. Fire needs to consistently burn. Gravity needs to consistently pull. Biological processes need to function predictably. Without these regularities, we couldn't learn, we couldn't build science, and our choices would have no meaningful impact. But this is the crucial point. A world governed by such consistent, impersonal laws will inevitably have sharp edges. Tectonic plates, shifting according to geological laws, will eventually cause earthquakes. Biological processes of mutation and evolution, necessary for life to adapt, will inevitably produce harmful viruses and genetic disorders. Water following the laws of physics will create floods and tsunamis. From this perspective, God doesn't send each individual earthquake or cancer cell as a specific act. Rather, He created and sustains a universe with stable natural laws, knowing that these laws, while necessary for a coherent world conducive to soul-making, would also inevitably lead to natural evil. The potential for suffering is the necessary flip side of a world where growth, learning, and meaningful free choice are possible. God permits the natural evil not because He wants the suffering itself, but because it is an unavoidable consequence of the type of world necessary for His greater purpose of developing morally free beings. A second major response comes from a school of thought known as skeptical theism. This isn't a specific explanation for evil, but rather a challenge to the assumption that we should even expect to understand God's reasons. Skeptical theists argue that the gap between the infinite mind of God and the finite mind of human beings is simply too vast. We are like ants trying to understand a complex tapestry by looking at just one thread from underneath. We see a seemingly chaotic knot, a patch of darkness, and we conclude the entire design is flawed. But from the designer's perspective, that knot might be essential. For the beauty of the whole picture, the argument goes like this: if an all-good, all-powerful God exists, He would only allow an instance of suffering if it were necessary to bring about some greater good, or to prevent some even worse evil that could not be achieved otherwise. Now, when we look at a specific instance of horrific natural suffering, say, a fawn burning alive in a forest fire, we might think, there is absolutely no possible justification for that suffering. An all-good God could have, and should have, prevented it. But the skeptical theist pushes back. How could we possibly know that? How can our limited, finite minds possibly survey all the potential consequences, ripple effects, and unknown goods across all of space and time that might be connected to that one event? Just because we cannot see a good reason for God to permit a particular instance of suffering, it doesn't follow that there is no good reason. Our inability to comprehend God's full plan doesn't mean the plan is flawed. This isn't meant to be an emotionally satisfying answer. It doesn't take away the pain or the horror, but it aims to be a logical defeater to the argument that says, I can't see a reason, therefore no reason exists. Skeptical theism simply injects a dose of epistemic humility, suggesting that judging the actions of an infinite being based on our limited perspective might be fundamentally misguided. A third response, particularly important within Christian theology, places natural evil within a larger cosmic narrative. This view argues that the current state of the natural world is not how God originally intended it, nor is it how it will ultimately remain. Christian scripture speaks of the fall of humanity, an act of rebellion that didn't just affect humans, but had cosmic consequences. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans 8 that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time, He suggests that creation itself is currently in bondage to decay, subject to futility and suffering, awaiting its liberation. From this perspective, natural evil is a sign that the world is currently not right. It is broken, operating under a curse, a consequence of a larger cosmic rebellion against God. The earthquakes, the diseases, the suffering, are the groans of a creation longing for redemption. But crucially, this view does not end there. It offers an eschatological hope in the end times. Christian theology culminates in the promise of a new heaven and a new earth, a restored creation where, as the book of Revelation puts it, He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. In this framework, natural evil is seen as a real, horrific, but ultimately temporary reality. God's ultimate plan is not just to justify the current suffering, but to eventually defeat it entirely. His current permission of natural evil is understood within the context of a larger story that ends in restoration and redemption. This doesn't necessarily explain the why of every specific disaster, but it reframes the problem from why does a good God allow this at all, to why does a good God allow this for now, given His promise to ultimately end it. So, we have these major responses. The soul-making theodicy, suffering, is necessary for growth. Skeptical theism, we can't know God's reasons, and the eschatological view, the world is broken but will be restored. Do these answers solve the problem of natural evil? For many, perhaps not emotionally. The visceral horror of watching someone suffer from a natural disaster or disease often overwhelms these abstract philosophical arguments, and the sheer scale of natural evil can seem gratuitous, far beyond what seems necessary for soul-making. But the question for the philosopher and theologian is not primarily about emotional satisfaction, but about logical coherence. Does the existence of natural evil make the existence of an all-powerful, all-good God logically impossible? These theodicies argue no. They attempt to show that it is at least plausible that such a God could have morally sufficient reasons for permitting the natural suffering we observe, even if we don't fully understand those reasons. And this brings us to the core of the debate, the question I want to leave with you. Do you find these defenses convincing? Does the idea of soul-making, the limits of human knowledge, or the promise of a future restoration provide a logically adequate framework for reconciling natural evil with a good and powerful God? Or is the sheer weight and apparent randomness of natural suffering simply too much? Is the existence of things like childhood cancer, tsunamis, and pandemics simply incompatible with the notion of a benevolent designer? Does natural evil remain the insurmountable Everest for theism? Let me know your thoughts, respectfully, in the comments below. This is perhaps the hardest question, and there are no easy answers. If you found this exploration of a difficult topic valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that grapples with the big questions of faith, reason, and suffering. Thanks for watching.